How important is it to write bad pages? Awful, embarrassing?
So important. I think that is something that I cannot emphasize enough. It is crucial to allow yourself to write bad stuff, because like somewhere along the line I came across this like quote that was basically saying, you can't edit what you haven't written. And I just thought that was just perfect advice, because you can spend forever trying to rewrite the same sentence over and over again, making it right, making it perfect before moving on. And I don't think it helps your craft at all. I don't think redoing that sentence 8 times and finding the best reason, the best perfect way to say that sentence really contributes to your skill. I think it is much more valuable to just write it, put it out there, put the words on paper or, digitally. And once you have those words, then you can look at how to perfect it, how to make it better. But this idea of, trying to make it perfect on the fly is really unrealistic. And it's something that you don't really see in other forms of art, but writers think they can just do it the first time. We can just throw it out there. Like, you're never going to see a sculptor just try to carve the whole thing at once and they're done. Look, looks beautiful. It's perfect. Like that would be a waste of time. They do a rough version and then they go in for details and then they get smaller and smaller, finer details. And it's the same with most arts, but I think writers kind of have this feeling that it needs to be perfect. It, right out of your brain and onto the page, it needs to be flawless. And I think you don't take any risks when you do that. You don't push yourself, you don't say anything interesting or unique, and you don't give yourself time to reflect on your own work. Because if you're in, that single mindset when you're writing, that is just, one moment of your time. And if you come back and look at something a couple days later, you are going to have a different perspective on it. You're going to be able to see it more clearly. But if you're trying to do it all in that moment, you're just very limited in the scope of what it is that you can achieve and how good you can make it. And so I think I've talked to a lot of writers who, oh, someone told me this thing that I wrote was terrible and I feel really bad and I'm never writing again. And I'm like, if anything, that's just telling you that you're doing something worthwhile. You are, creating something bad and putting it out there. Like, that's honestly, it's easier in a way it's easier to put out, really good work than to put out bad work, if that makes sense. I think there's a lot more that goes into the risk and the bravery of putting out something that is imperfect, that has flaws, and allowing people to critique it, to give you feedback and that sort of thing, and even allowing yourself to take that time and give yourself feedback. And when you're just trying to make it perfect and put it out there, like, well, yeah, if you put out something perfect, great, good for you, but what did you learn? What have you benefited from in doing that? It's not hard to put out something perfect because you're like, yeah, it's great. I know it's great. I did it. It's a great thing. But I think you're really limiting yourself if you're trying to do that all the time. If everything you put out is supposed to be perfect and ideal, you're not going to make mistakes necessarily, but you're also not going to make something really interesting.
And so in 2019, when you sort of revisited writing, if I have this correctly, and you downloaded Wattpad, were you in that mindset that, even though I've been trained this way and you had time wanting to be a journalist, I'm going to allow myself to dip my toe in? Like, how did that work?
I think I actively tried to have that mentality when I got back into writing. It was like, you know what? I'm not doing this for anyone else right now. I am allowing myself to make mistakes. I'm allowing myself to break rules. I'm challenging that sense of, perfectionism, and kind of challenging my knee-jerk reaction to, hide it until it's perfect and make everything flawless. And one of the things with live posting your work, or at least semi-live posting my work, I usually have like quite a buffer built up, but I will post stuff that's, it's not perfectly edited, it's not finished. It's stressful, but it comes with so many gifts in, the ability to get that instantaneous feedback and to get people seeing your work and relating to it and interacting with it in a way that is not really common for authors to get to do. And when I started learning that, I realized, oh, I can allow myself these mistakes because, one, the audience understands. This particular audience, they know it's not a finished book. They know that's not what they're looking for. But also it gave me the freedom in my writing process to, add the crazy scene that didn't really make sense, or, add something silly that I thought was just for fun, and a lot of those small risks, they seem big when you're making them, but I look back and I see them as small risks. They really paid off. A lot of the things that I thought like maybe I won't include that, or, should I edit down, or should I, do this a different way? A lot of those things are the things that my readers will say, I love that thing. I'm so glad you kept that thing. I'm so glad you have this chapter or this character, or, this was the scene breaking moment for me, or whatever. Those things are usually those risks, the things I wouldn't have done otherwise, the things that I would have held back on. And when I kind of push myself out of my comfort zone and I'm like, you know what, just go for it. Just see what happens. This is a low risk situation. If it pays off, great. If it doesn't, oh well, I can change it later. And it tends to pay off. I think there's a reason why your instincts, are pushing you to try these things and to write badly and come up with ideas that oh, maybe that's cliche, or maybe that doesn't work, because you have to test the waters. You have to, attempt it to see what happens, because we're in an age where a lot of things have been done before, and there's a lot of art that's already been made. And if you have this feeling that, oh, I want to try this, I want to add something here that I think could be received badly, there's a reason you have that feeling. It's telling you something. It's urging you forward, and I think it almost always pays off.
And another thing I noticed about with Wattpad, and I'm sure that's with other, platforms as well, is that you have a list of trigger warnings, which I found fascinating. And that's a risk in itself, because, if you can't talk about certain things, then you can't really explore them and heal them. But then I get it. Some people could be either offended, or it could send them in a spiral. So I just thought that's interesting. That's a risk itself.
Yeah, I mean, I really believe in trigger warnings, because I think there's just no reason not to include them, because the people who need them are going to care about them, and the people who don't need them, they don't really care. They're going to move right along. And I think people are afraid as writers, oh, well, I don't want to give too much away. I don't want to, if I say my story contains, violence or pregnancy or whatever it may be, that in itself could be a spoiler sort of thing. But I think people don't necessarily mind small spoilers like that. I think there's more risk to not telling people enough about your story and having them go in blind and feeling, offended or betrayed, or, just like they didn't have a sense of what the story was and they misjudged it. Readers are not going to walk away happy if they go into a story thinking it's one thing and they come out with something entirely different. They're like, whoa, I didn't see this coming. I didn't want this. This wasn't, even if it's just, I'm not in the mood for this today. I think as writers, we are so protective of our stories and, the plot twists and the things that we think are going to be really important, that we don't give enough information. And I think the same holds true for story descriptions. I will see so many people be so vague in their story description that I'm like, I have no idea what this is about. I've just read 3 paragraphs and I don't know what your story is about. You're not going to get people in the door that way. You're way better off telling them way more than they need to know. And, if someone gave you a brief synopsis of a movie and said, oh, it's about this, and this guy goes here and he does this and he does that, you're not going to go, oh, well, great, now I'm not going to see the movie. It's like, oh, well, that's too much information. It's all over. I can't see it now. Most people use that information to make choices about what it is they're going to spend their time on. And in the case of triggers, there are people who have really severe psychological reactions to things. And I know that there are some people who I don't believe in trigger warnings. I don't believe in acknowledging these things, for whatever reason they think it lessens the work. And I think, if you want to be the most informed reader you possibly can be going into my book, I want to give you the resource to do that.
Have you ever begun a story thinking of the cover art?
Oh, I think sort of. I was saying I'm a very visual person. I think that there's inevitably some thoughts there. There's kind of I kind of have this vague image of what I'm imagining for the cover. Sometimes it doesn't work. The cover that I had in mind, one of my books is the Demon King of Lust, and I imagine him on this big throne and kind of leaning to the side and looking very wicked sort of thing, and I could not find the right art for it. It's just it wasn't working, and I went with my fourth attempt at the design, and that was the one that I stuck with, and it was entirely different. It's him kind of holding a fireball and kind of this glowing pentagram thing behind him. And it looked really cool, and it wasn't at all what I had in mind. But I think there's always kind of a rough sense of oh, maybe this will be what it looks like. But I think that sense rarely translates to what it ends up being.
Now, do you, as a reader, choose a lot of things either on Wattpad or whatever place that you consume books by the cover?
I think somewhat. I think there's always going to be that initial interest when you're looking at cover and title, and it's going to be very quick. What am I seeing here that strikes up this initial interest? And if you don't kind of get in the door with a good cover and title, then they are not going to be swayed by the description they're never going to read. And in my case, I think I tend to gravitate towards covers with real people, which is not the trend right now. A lot of the trend is more art and illustration, and I think that's fine, and if that's what you're into, that's great. I think a lot of times covers are a great shorthand for what's going on inside the book. And in my case, I tend to gravitate towards the real people covers because, one, they tend to be, books for adults, and I tend to prefer the adult books rather than the YA or even just kind of the more sweet, clean romance. I tend to like the fiery, intense romance books and stuff like that. And they tend to lean more on the side of, real photographs versus illustrations. But there is also a shorthand that you can see with genre. And with paranormal, which is a lot of what I read, you will see a lot of photos rather than illustrations. Illustrations tend to lean more on the side of contemporary romance and chick lit and those kind of more general romantic fiction. And then there's kind of the other end of fantasy where you will get more realistic illustrations, like painted illustrations and stuff like that. And they're usually more elaborate and there's a lot more detail in them. And when I'm just browsing books, you kind of have that innate sense in your head of what you're looking at. Oh, I'm looking at fantasy right now, or I'm looking at, contemporary romance. And sometimes that's wrong. I've seen books where the cover made me think one thing and I take a look at it and it's something entirely different and unexpected. And I can imagine there's got to be some sort of reason why they do it that way. But I think for the most part, I try not to do that, because I think if you're trying to attract the right reader, show them something that they think they want. And if they're going, oh, I love fantasy books and I'm looking for a fantasy book, if your cover is not, somewhat similar to the standard, you're going to be throwing off that reader. And maybe they're going to put a lot more, emphasis on what that cover is in what they assume your story is about. And you want to attract the reader that wants your story, not the reader who wants, you know, the story that has this cover necessarily. You know, if it's mismatched, there's going to be disappointment either way. And so I think there's kind of this fine line between, you know, adhering to those tropes and standards and trying to fit in, but also, you know, you don't want the book to look like every other book on the shelf. So there's this balance, but at least for me, I try to at least have that kind of quick judge cover that says on the outside something that I think will be well represented by what's on the inside of the book.
Yeah, interesting, because just perusing TikTok last night in preparation for today, just seeing the different books people were recommending holding up, and it did seem like some of them that were more maybe conventional or sweeter or something, it was more hand-drawn illustration, beautifully done, and maybe ones that were a little more intense, it was like a picture and more sort of fantastical. You know?
Yeah, I think that it's just kind of human nature to see these images and make quick assumptions, because especially when you're looking for books right now, there's so many offerings. You know, you go on Kindle, you can be just scrolling for days. There's just so many options, and you can't possibly look at every single one and open it up and read the description, whether you're in person or you're, you know, on your phone or wherever. It's just not feasible to do. So we have to have some kind of shortcut, and I think that visual is the first shortcut that a lot of people rely on.